Welcome to the second day of our RAW Summit, RAW standing for Rights and Wellbeing. The purpose of RAW is to find ways for people to heal from the traumatic effects of stop and search and just trauma in general. And this is all about therapeutic approaches. So this is what today's event is going to be about. So what I will do is just start off with a bit of housekeeping, which is basically just to, if everyone can keep their microphones muted while they're not speaking. This session is being recorded and it is going to be edited and added to our website for future use. Adjust your cameras to suit, however, if you want to be on camera, that's fine. If you don't want to be on camera, that's also fine. Please do share personal information, but only that you feel comfortable with others knowing. And please do be courteous of the panel and each other. And we do have a breakout room if you do need a moment. And also please put any questions that you might have in the chat, or you can press the in the reactions, you can raise your hand if you would like to say something on screen. So I will now hand over to Deborah, who will just be managing the panel until Ben arrives.
Hi, I'd like to welcome everybody to this afternoon session. And basically what we want to kind of explore is how is therapy important? If therapy is important for all people, how do we ensure that a therapeutic approach is accessible to people who have not, particularly Black people, who have not necessarily accessed therapy? And how do we need to adopt or revise therapy to meet the specific needs of African and Caribbean people who have been affected by stop search, for example? It's a broader discussion than that, but those are the themes I would like us to address. Could we start first by introducing ourselves, which would be really helpful? I'm Deborah. I am the Executive Director for Stopwatch, and I've been in post since June. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Jamie. I'm a counsellor. So I work with ages 11 to 25 who have been affected by serious youth violence. I run my own business as well. So just dealing with generic like anxiety and depression as well. So
brilliant. Hi, Jamie.
Hi, good afternoon all. I'm Leon from a Safe Place to Talk, a therapist as well. Been practicing for quite a few years now. I have worked with, shall I say, with children from 4 to 11, and also from 11 to 25. Likewise, adults I've worked with as well. Worked with people from refugees, worked with people who looked after, worked people who are in the care system. And yeah, in regard to that, I can also mirror some other people in the way how their approach may be slightly different to the actual conventional model of counselling. But hopefully we can also get to the same destination of healing for all.
Lovely, thank you. Beverly, look at me calling you out. Beverly Smith?
Hi, no worries. Hi, yeah, I'm Beverly. I am a psychotherapist. I work primarily with adults. More recently, I've attended a training which helps support me learning more about therapy in an African-centered way. So I'm wanting to incorporate that in the work that I do at the moment, and actually thinking about maybe developing groups. I think as a people, the group experience rather than the individual one may be more helpful. So looking at how I can progress that.
Yeah, greetings everyone. Pleased to meet you all. Hi, Beverly and SA, who I also know on the call. So I work in mental health, primarily in early intervention with psychosis. And so I work with young people, sort of used to be from 16 upwards, now it's sort of 18. And so it's delivering sort of recovery-based interventions. I recently did the same course as Beverly and SA. We did a diploma in Black psychology and African-centered therapy. I also wear another hat whereby I'm the chair of the BME network for our organization. And so support, you know, supporting staff development and staff wellbeing issues from sort of, you know, Black, Asian and sort of ethnic minority perspective, and because of the impact that that has on the sort of patient care. And I'm also involved in one of the pilots, which is the patient care and race equality framework, which is supporting Black communities in terms of access, experience and outcomes within mental health.
Okay, fantastic. We've got a pilot running in Leicester, so I have heard of that. I do know what that is about.
I'm Essay. I've been a therapist for a number of years now. As Jide and Beverly mentioned, I've also just completed a course in African therapy and Black psychology, which was immensely rewarding. And I think I'm here so that I can continue to learn and share ways of integrating that theory into practice and coming back to our Indigenous ways of healing, essentially. So I'm really curious about today's session. And I work with, I didn't say who I work with, so I work with women who have experienced trauma, essentially, Black women specifically. So that could be childhood sexual abuse, racial trauma, domestic abuse, and its various forms. So yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. Can I ask Neil just to introduce yourselves quickly and the rest of the Stopwatch team, please?
Yeah, hi guys, my name's Neil Brown. I'm the Youth and Community Engagement Coordinator for Stopwatch. Thank you so much for attending this panel. The reason why we put this on mainly is, so I mean, it sounds like we've got the right heads in the room for a start, so that's a brilliant start. So we put this on because we want to try to broaden the scope on what's going on in terms of the therapeutic resources that's out there. We want the community to know that there are therapists and there are people that can help them that look like them. And we really wanted to put that on the map and have the discussion amongst you know, therapists alike, along with Ben Bowling, who should have been here but can't make it, unfortunately. So yeah, it's left with us to have this discussion.
And Shenna is our MC for today. Habib, whose name should appear somewhere, is the current ferret. So if you have a question, that goes into the chat, and Habib makes sure it's brought to the attention of the person who the question is directed at. So he's not going to be speaking at the moment, but can do if he sees fit.
So Neil asked me to come down. I'm one of the therapists that's on the invite, on the information that was sent out. And my background, I've been working with young people now for about 20 years. I've been a therapist for the past 5 years. And in my roles, I've worked with young people in the criminal justice system. I used to manage a team in one of the major trauma centres in London, St George's, where I would work with young people at risk of serious youth violence that had come in that had been stabbed or shot or at risk of sexual exploitation. And I was responsible for safeguarding them in the hospital and then thinking about therapeutic avenues that they could explore. So I got a lot of experience in terms of young people, criminal justice, and from a therapeutic lens. So that's why I'm here today.
Brilliant. Has anybody not introduced themselves? Sorry, I'm just, obviously my thing's not working well. I know Nina hasn't. Nina, sorry.
Hi, everyone, and really, really happy to be here, part of this session. I'm really here to learn. I'm really interested and keen to hear about how therapy and therapeutic approaches could be defined for our own communities. What do they look like, how we measure them, and so on. So I'm really, really looking forward to, learning. And I'm also a member of Stopwatch. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm also a member of Stopwatch. I'm a trustee, one of the founder members. I'm one of several people that's really, I think, encouraged Stopwatch to think psychodynamically and therapeutically. And I'm an academic in my day job, but really the value that I see in psychotherapy is very personal. I've been in therapy for 15 years, and that shouldn't be taken as it's not worked, so I'm still in it for 15 years. It's that I found it hugely valuable, and I've stayed in it for 15 years because it's one of the most important things that I've discovered. And my feeling is, not only is it really helpful individually, but it's proved hugely valuable to me in just understanding the world around me. And I think it has applications in all sorts of areas, and I certainly think it has applications here, and I'm really keen and eager to listen and learn from what you guys think about how we might use this approach.
All right, so I'd like to kick off the conversation, if I may, by asking Essay, you'd said something about indigenous ways of healing. And on a personal level, I think I understand what that means. But can you kind of explore that with me in terms of what it means and what it looks like? Sorry, you're on the spot. Look at that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I know. I feel like I'm a bit on the spot now. I'm just thinking about.
Throw it back out. Throw it back out, because there's more people to talk. So feel free to share the question.
Okay, so I think in my intro I talked about returning to indigenous ways of healing, and so my thinking around that is how our ancestors, those who came before us, and wherever we're from, well, I'm thinking pretty much I'm West African, so how what healing looked like, what was done. So the power of community, what comes to me is the power of community, the power of ritual, of coming together, and what that sort of looks like, initiations in certain periods for boys and girls. I work mainly with adults, but I feel like a lot of the time we missed certain pivotal parts of our lives that perhaps impact the way we see things now. And so I'm wanting to, in the therapy room, what does that look like?
So can I throw that question back to you? In the therapy room, what does that look like? Okay, so in the therapy room, for me, some of the clients that I've worked with, it has been about documenting pivotal times. Maybe it's a bit of a systemic way of thinking as well. What times in their lives where they felt like there was something lacking. It could also be coming into, it could be mindfulness, it could be different things. I can't quite find my words now. It's okay, because I put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I need a moment just to recollect. Jide, do you want to add?
Yeah, I've had my hand up to sort of jump in a bit, because one of the things that has come out of the training that we've done, and I think it's a sense of where we are and how we relate to therapy and what that means for us and what that connection is, and there being more of a connection that is inherent in our ancestral past. And so one of the things that we've done and that we're sort of rolling out in different organizations is emotional emancipation circles. And so if there's been an issue around trauma or a particular sort of incident, then we can work with people in this group setting. So we see sort of therapy as something that is community-based and that is done, you know, as a community. Is not to say that there isn't the sort of benefit of the one-to-one, but, you know, healing as a community and seeing it in that context is an important approach as well.
How do we understand therapy? I'm sorry, how do we understand trauma? What does trauma mean in this context then?
In this particular context, I suppose it is whatever has impacted on someone in such a way that it has a reoccurring effect. And so the thoughts of that, or sort of things that remind you of that incident, sort of bring the feelings, the emotions to the fore, and they impact on you in that very moment, and also impact on you in thinking about sort of moving forward. And in moving forward in terms of like recovery or coming to terms with what has happened without sort of, and I'm going to use the word, sort of being re-traumatized again, having to relive that experience that may have had such a negative impact. And so the emotional emancipation circle, they take into account, you know, the fact that we have been told a lie, and that lie being sort of white superiority and Black inferiority. And so it's coming from that premise, because quite a lot, and working in mental health, is that sort of, you know, race inequality and racism isn't necessarily factored in to someone's experience of sort of mental illness or becoming unwell or being impacted by something that's created trauma. And so as part of the emotional emancipation circles, that is given a central place, and it's acknowledged, because that is also part of the person's trauma. Racism and being impacted by racism is part of a person's trauma that often isn't given the credence that is necessary.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. If anybody has any questions, can you put them in the chat, please? Scotty, do you have a suggestion for how that looks for you?
I'll take myself off mute. From the initial conversations, how they're starting around emancipation kind of therapy and around the context of community, from my experience, the individual therapy is cornerstone, because unfortunately, a lot of people have almost been operating in this traumatized state that they don't even know that there's trauma that they're operating from. So they have to actually understand what trauma is. So I'm thinking about some research that I read about around children of the Holocaust, and one generation down, their siblings or the children were more anxious and more stressful. If we think about our communities, we're talking about hundreds of years of almost DNA being altered, so that trauma is almost like a normal response. And for people to understand that racism and what they're experiencing in life is actually a traumatic state. And if you don't understand what trauma is, you don't think as therapy as something that is helpful, because you're operating in a hypervigilant state or in a traumatized way. So for me, getting people to that space where they can understand the importance of community cohesion, where people, for example, when I'm running DV groups, because the perpetrators of DV, they've gone through the program, when they're sitting together, they realize that they've got a commonality. So I understand the importance of these groups, but we have to get individuals to that space first. And what is the Black experience of therapy? So for us, fortunately, we're in a space now where there is some Black therapists. But for most of the young people that I've worked with, this again is around racism in the educational system from very early. If they've got a traumatic experience, i.e. coming from communities with adverse community experiences where they're seeing violence when they go to school, they're presenting in a traumatic way. It doesn't get identified as a traumatic way. It gets identified as a behavioral issue. Then you go down a pupil referral unit, then you go down to criminal justice. So it's more re-traumatizing. So how do we get people to understand trauma in terms of the Black community? Because for most of the Black community, when you talk about therapy and therapists, it's either A, I'm mad, because that's stigma associated with talking therapies. B, they're not gonna understand me. They're not gonna understand the context of what I present with. They're not gonna understand how racism in itself is a traumatic experience, coupled with all the things that have come on top of that. So for me, in my role, in my own kind of therapeutic work that I do, it's around raising awareness of what trauma is, of what racism is, of the imbalance and the disproportionality in these institutions, and how those institutions itself can be a traumatic experience for you to navigate, and connecting with a piece of themselves, i.e. their ancestry, and being able to access the community support groups that you guys were talking about in terms of the emancipation circles and so forth. But first we have to get people to that point. So that's how I think.
I'd like to come back to that about getting people to that point. But first, can I ask Leon? Leon, what do you feel?
That was resounding and resonated with me was more than anything else. How do you heal as a community? Firstly, that's the primary first part. I also get it for the individual basis, but as a community, for the therapeutic process, it needs to be done on a community basis and to enlighten, if you will, the community. But it takes an individual to do that. Clearly understand in regards to the cornerstone of recognizing what you don't know, what you don't know. And that's usually the first place of hopefully getting some into the room. But one of the things I work with some young people, and I have done likewise with my colleagues as well, is almost not even having counseling or therapy. A lot of the way that I have worked with young people, even adults, is just sit down and conversate with them and just say, oh, what does this look like? What does a therapist look like? With young people especially.
Yeah.
And to them, generally, it's the white middle class lady at the end of the corridor. And that's the image. And the narrative I speak to them, it's, I do not try, if you will, have nothing else rather than what's going on for you? Where you at? What's going on? Well, I used to live here. Really? Yeah, I used to live in this thing. Oh, my body's got scars and bruises. What do you mean? I got cut. I got held up with a gun. Somebody tried to shoot me. Somebody did this, that. No. Yes, it happens to me. And then I say, look, that's traumatic. And I said, no, but it's every day. No, you don't need to keep it moving. So what I try to do is link in with them. So where you are is where I've been. Then understanding almost kind of no longer desensitizing what the trauma is, but understanding that has an impact on me. So then hopefully when you tell me something, I am listening to you. They don't have to armor up and have to almost pretend when talking to me. So therefore, the defense mechanism of pretending to be something else, one layer of it's gone, but now it's all gone. So it's almost community-based setting first, rather in my mind, how do we heal as a community? And that part will take work. So for myself, I'm trying to do a master's. I'm trying to do work onto the PhD level. But even then, myself trying to do that, I'm seeing the barriers for myself, because the expectancy for peers and colleagues, oh, you're doing a master's, great, how can we help you? For me to do a master's, the amount of barriers I'm going through just to get to that stage, again, just reinforces why people don't go further on or want to see something differently.
One of the things that you said that was really powerful for me was, where you are is where I've been. And so are you saying then that only Black people who have been in the spaces and challenges that their clients are experiencing can really be therapeutically valuable to other Black people?
No, definitely not saying that. I think healing can come from anywhere, but healing is a lot more accepted, I feel, from people who knows what you've been through. Healing is a lot more connectivity. That's where the healing is. When you're connected with somebody, that's the place where the healing is. Covered wounds don't heal well. So when you're masking up yourself in the room, you're not going to heal very well, because again, you're in another space where you've got to adjust, you've got to armor up, you've got to be this different person, and you're editing yourself when you speak. And that's not what you need. I said, unless you feel absolutely able to be honest with me, then fine, then don't talk to me. I don't mean in a bad way, but I want you to feel that you don't need to pretend to be you. You talk to me as of where you are. If you feel like it, if you don't feel like it, call it as it is. But I want you to be in control. And I try to give full autonomy to them. And sometimes that's too much, because they've never been in that position before. Sometimes it's overwhelming for them, because it's easy to be told what to do. It's easy to be led by somebody else.
Okay, so for therapy, you need to come as your authentic, come and be accepted in that space as your authentic self, as your full self.
Can I chime in here?
Mm-hmm.
As you were speaking, Leon, I was thinking about, the power dynamic to the question you asked, Deborah, in terms of coming into the therapy room and seeing someone who looks like you. If they don't look like you, you're automatically, there's this mistrust and there's this defensiveness. And I feel like it's so important for there to be more Black therapists, because honestly speaking, I've trained in organizations where I'm very concerned about some of the white therapists, what they're saying and what they're doing. And if you have not done the work as a white therapist, oh my days, it can be immensely destructive and counterproductive in the therapeutic process.
Can you explain how it's counterproductive?
Well, it's replicating the trauma that they have experienced outside of the room, inside the room, where it's supposed to be a safe space, where they're supposed to be working and healing from their trauma. Because I think for anyone to access therapy, it's immensely courageous to do that. And I think in terms of us as a people, in terms of Black people, I feel like, I think as Scotty was mentioning earlier about some of the perceptions of therapy and how we are cautious.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not no homogenous group, but I'm just saying that in terms of thinking about from generation to generation, it's like, okay, don't tell nobody your business. Don't tell anybody. You get me? You tell you're an elder in the community, or you tell a pastor, or you just keep quiet. You deal with it within the family. And so because of the level of mistrust. And so that's why I say I feel like it's quite courageous to enter into therapy, and how it's immensely important for, as you was, I think, Leon, you were talking about coming, enabling the client to come authentically and to bring themselves, because, at the end of the day, they are in a vulnerable position.
I'll be brief so Jamie can come in. It's just to attest to what Essay was saying, and it's about the trust and also the perception, as Scotty has sort of mentioned about the white middle-class white woman at the end of the corridor. And with regard to CAMS,
adolescent mental health services.
Yeah. I have a friend that's a lead in a particular borough and doing work with a particular school where 96% of the pupils are from Black families. And they did a survey in terms of reaching out and connecting, and there was zero response from those Black families with regard to sort of engaging with CAM. And we know, because Scotty has mentioned the fact that rather than when there are emotional issues, rather than those being seen as emotional issues, they're seen as sort of like behavioral issues and conduct issues. And we know from like Harry Sewell's research about the funding and what CAMS looks for, and it's normally sort of people who are self-harming, and that tends to be sort of young white middle class girls,
or at least harm that can be demonstrated rather than putting yourself in the harm of racism.
Absolutely. And so there's still that issue about getting people to engage, and the essay, as Essay was saying, about the trust. And so what is the perception of these services, and what is the perceived pathway that engaging with these services are going to take you down? Okay. Because we see in the figures that it's like there's low uptake in CAMS, but then as soon as you get to sort of adult, then it sort of, it just shoots up. And that experience isn't a positive experience, hence the need for, the PCREF and what's happening there, because we know that it's still been a problem decade after decade after decade.
But the access to child and adolescent mental health services is hysterically bad across the country. And the practitioners have got no idea of the lives of white working class young people, much less black working class or middle class or vaguely beige young people, at all. And so
Yeah.
it's a kind of a bind, isn't it, to
And
move
it's
forward from there.
Yeah, it's as Scotty was saying, it's what that perception of the sort of CAMS workers are, what the presentation is and how people are engaged with, because it's not what they're saying or what they report, if they are help seeking, isn't interpreted in a way that is helpful, to that person. And so then that person doesn't have a positive experience, engaging with those services that are meant to be there to help them.
Okay. Jamie, sorry, you were going to say something and we cut you off before.
Yeah, no, I was going to just say there's definitely a power in, like, the therapist. Look, I'm not saying that it has to be that all the time, but just in my experience, there's definitely a power in someone who looks like you, because when a lot of the time when I rock up, I work in pupil referral units as well, and when I rock up, and I often get from the black students, "Oh, you're the therapist," and I'm like, "Yeah, well, what was you expecting?" And I can just see that relief in them, like that, because they were expecting someone white and they was expecting someone to not talk like that and not understand. And when they talk, they have to explain what a certain slang word means. I talk like that. Do you know what I'm trying to say? I'm from where they're from. So, like, there massively is a power in having a therapist that looks like them and is from. I'm not saying again that it can't work, but it helps. It definitely helps.
Jump backwards from this motherhood and apple pie. So what are the negatives? How I mean, as people who are working with people, we've experienced times when I have turned up in the room with my black face and the black people in the room are A, distrustful because, well, Leicester's quite small, you might know my parents, B, don't really value what it is we're bringing, because they completely see the value in the whiteness that we're saying is doing them harm.
Yeah, I'll be truthful honest with you. I have not actually experienced that, because my cohort have been young black people, and I've mostly got, this is a good thing. So I can't really. It's hard for me to speak to that because I've never really had that. I've had it the other way where it's been someone white,
as well,
and then you can see that their back's kind of up and they're like, okay, this guy's younger than me for a start and he's black and he talks a certain way. How the hell is he going to know some of the issues and things that I go through? So I can't, it's tough for me to speak to that because I've not had that.
Has anybody else, or is it just my life?
I know exactly what you mean, Deborah, in regards to that. Because it's almost like the assumption that all black people eat chicken. So it's the horrible stereotype of another black person judging another black person's lived experience and saying, almost like, but I have gone through that and I'm black. So why are you complaining about that? Why are you having an issue with that? Because it's your script in your mind. So the same way it's counterproductive in one sense, or should I say it's productive in one sense because somebody looks at you, but in regards to it being counterproductive, it's almost based on somebody's perception of therapy. So when it's supposed to be a non-judgmental space, we all carry some sort of script. So whether it's a sexual script, an emotional script, a spiritual script in our mind. And the idea is when a client comes in the room, and as a therapist, check yourself. What do you carry with yourself in how you perceive the issue, what they're going through? One of the issues that, and this is why I'm trying to change it from a organization top down rather than bottom up instruction with the actual approaches or the actual access to therapy, is that we have, let's say, a refugee service for counselling, a women's only counselling, a LGBTQ plus counselling. We have all these different, but we don't have a black counselling experience. We don't have a black therapy, and that to me is the most integral. Why has that been left? But yet, even as we go through 400 plus years of consistent trauma on the news, on the daily, of seeing people being stopped, searched, of the micro and macro traumas. So then we just say it's behavior issues. Oh, they act like because of this. but we never see the lead up to all the other traumas that's contributed to it. So here's the issue that I want to see is the whole range of therapy. We've got Gestalt, we've got, you know, Freud, but we don't have a Black experience of a theory of counselling. That was what I want to change.
Can I ask Beverly? Beverly, how do you feel of that?
I guess, well, there's a number of things I've been thinking about. I'm thinking about the language we use, and something like therapy can actually then alienate people from actually wanting to explore it. So maybe we need to look at the language we use.
Yes.
I also thinking about how within the therapeutic spaces, there's an expert and there's a patient. So in that sets up a dynamic, there's something wrong with you and I'm going to fix you. And I guess we can have an idea where there are two people meeting together who both have something to offer to the space, as opposed to the person who's called the client being the sick one. And also I think there's one of the things I remember from the African-centered course was around fixing people to put them back in the system. So it's not about actually meeting them where they are and looking at systemic problem. Is I'm going to fix you so you can go back out and continue feeding the system in the way we need you to feed the system.
Returning you to the horror. Absolutely that. Absolutely that. My sorry, Jide.
Yeah, I was just going back to something that you'd said, Deborah, about sort of the interaction and the perception that there might be of a Black therapist and what people's experience of that might be. Because depending on the approach that you're coming from, you may not be doing anything differently from what a white person is going to do. And so that may be the experience of, you know, it's a Black face, but they're just delivering sort of, you know, white therapy that doesn't really sort of relate to me. And so, and also depending on where that person is, what they've internalized, how colonialized their sort of way of thinking is, how they perceive the Black people that they're actually sort of there to help, but maybe not understanding themselves and where they're coming from. So there's not enough reflexiveness in their practice, that the harm that they're doing through their own projection, because it's almost like not wanting to see yourself in that person. And then you can sort of almost, that can be the demonized part of yourself, which you can then externalize and condemn. Yes, absolutely, in that way.
Absolutely that.
So,
Scotty. Sorry. Go on. Sorry, Jedi. I thought you'd finished. Sorry, Jedi.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that there is that as an issue, and I think it's kind of, it takes some time to kind of like work through that, and for people to build up a trust as to where you're actually coming from and how helpful what you're doing is actually going to be or not.
And in the NHS therapeutic setting, we don't have time. Time is what we are not given. You're a broken body to heal in 6 sessions. Scotty?
I'm sitting here hearing the different conversations and different things are just racing through my mind. One of the things when we first started was around the ancestral kind of concept. And then I'm thinking about therapy, that most of our therapeutic training is based on Western ideology.
Absolutely.
So how can we be saying we're doing the ancestral thing when all of our training is based on this Eurocentric model? And to really understand Blackness, we're Black, we understand it. For me, most of the harm that has happened to human beings happens in some type of relationship. So therefore, the healing is in a relationship. So yes, it's good to have an understanding of the Eurocentric way. But for me, when I think about that old school community cohesion, speaking to your elders, what they brought was knowledge, wisdom, understanding, patience, empathy. They didn't have the Eurocentric way of thinking back then, but they were providing therapy in their communities. And I'm also thinking about the experience of Black people coming into therapeutic spaces. I think it was Beverly that mentioned, even the word, how do we, if my experience of therapy, of mental health has just been negative from day one, my mum's experience was negative, that was transferred to me as a young person, then my experience is negative. How do I view that word therapy? So for me, you know, as Black therapists, we have to start saying, actually, we're healers. We're connecting human beings to their original self. And part of that is getting to understand yourself. So there's some really important things here that I've picked up today from the conversations around my engagement, around that Eurocentric idea. When we become therapists, and I'm going to use a term here that might be frowned upon or so forth, do we become speaky spokey? We reinforce that Eurocentric, well, I'm better than you, innit? Because I've done this master's or I've done this degree, so I know more than you. So there's lots of different things that's making me really excited in my own profession and my own practice.
But also remember that people are experts in their own experience. And as a therapist, as somebody who is trying to help, you have to kind of support people to speak their truth and reflect that back so they can hear what their truth sounds like in somebody else's ears. However, I'm really pleased that this has got us thinking. Let me just ask my stopwatch colleagues if there's anything to add before I drag us to be talking about stop search and the disproportionalities and where therapy might fit in that scenario. My stopwatch colleagues, Neil, I know that you'd asked the question and you think I'd ignored you, but I haven't.
No, not at all. No, I just wanted to elaborate really on that point in terms of what therapy looks like and, you know, to the individual. I know when I was looking for a therapist, it meant so much to me. In fact, it was probably the biggest thing that I needed a therapist that looks like me. I mean, just on a general basis, the way I speak is the way I speak. And the way I speak, I use a lot of slang and stuff like that at times. And even at the best of times, I you know, it's hard to tone that down. And I just wanted to see a therapist that I didn't want to go in and have to change the way I speak, change the way I deliver, because I talk a lot with my hands and, you know, I'm a bit fidgety and stuff like that. I just wanted to be myself, just like you guys are saying. And I think that was the main thing that I wanted, and I definitely got that. But you're right, in terms of the word therapy, when I think of the word therapy, I think of a box room, 2 chairs, and just that thought sounds intimidating. So just like what you're saying, Scotty, in terms of the term therapy, I think if the name could get a bit remixed, softened, it might help these young people to approach it in a different mindset, with a different mindset.
Thanks for that. Mike, you've got a question?
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. I was really struck quite a few years ago when Plan B talked about vigilante social workers, and what he was talking about was that there was a lot of suspicion in his community of state social workers, but there were people in his community that actually took on a role that you could understand as being social workers, like the guy that ran the football team, the person in the youth club. So they weren't necessarily qualified. And I'm sort of wondering whether we can sort of factor therapeutic type interventions into our work. And hearing your talk, it got me, I don't know if this is a helpful term or a stupid term, almost pre-therapy, almost kind of exposing people to therapeutic understandings and therapeutic awareness in a way that doesn't require them to sit down one-to-one in that kind of intense and potentially quite threatening encounter, but to almost inculcate people with just a therapeutic sensibility. And I think that would be really valuable for a lot of the work that we're thinking of. And just if people have got any suggestions, any experience about how we might do that.
I'll say, yeah, so over the 6 weeks holiday, I did a lot of outreach work, and the word pre-therapy was something we kind of discussed. And basically what we was doing was going into certain areas, shrublands in Croydon, Handcroft Estate, and we was trying to engage these young people. And what we found really worked was when they was engaging in some of the other things that were going on, like football, if someone had been involved in any form of serious youth violence, just them coming to the side, 5 minutes and having a chat. And the word therapy was never used. It was just a chat, a quick chat. How you feeling? How you doing? I heard it was, you knew the guy who got killed the other day. What was that like for you? Oh, you know, I'm not doing too great. Okay, well, you know, that there's things you can do to, you know, help you with how you're feeling. Boom, boom, boom. And then quick 10 minutes. And then I would explain to them after, you know, that was therapy, that we had a little bit of therapy there. And they were like, is it? And I'm like, yeah, because they're expecting that, come to this certain place, sit in front of this certain person. Actually, one thing we're trying to do off the record where I'm working at the moment is trying to get away from that. Because a lot of the kids who we work with won't even come because of where the place is anyway. So actually, can I come to your estate? Is there a park somewhere? As long as it's safe, can I come and meet you in a Costa where it's quiet and have a chat? So we're trying to get away from like the therapy and trying to go towards like having pre-therapy kind of chats and then moving it along from there.
Brilliant. I know, thank you for that again. It's really giving us food for thought. I know that Leon, you want to say something, but Jamie, I think you've been waiting a while, or you kept looking like you're about to say something.
No, I just said something. Did no one
sorry,
hear what I said?
you. Sorry, lovely.
Yeah, that was me.
Sorry,
I was like,
lovely.
I thought I had myself on mute then. I was like, oh.
That would have been funny. Sorry. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to agree with Jamie, exactly what Mike was saying, and something I've worked in and have worked in before. But I said, so some of the work I've done has been in, let's say, barbershop spaces, or in just a general, like a meet and greet space. And we wouldn't, I say, this is not therapy, but this is, I am a therapist, and I would introduce myself as a therapist, but I said, this is not therapy. So let's have a quick talk, and then we do it maybe for, let's say, a couple of weeks until they get used to me. I say, look, now if you want to talk about whatever's going on for you, we can go to a certain space where you are most happiest with, as long as it's risk assessed, obviously, but a place where you're most happiest with and what's going on for you. But we can talk more in depth. I don't want to talk about it here. And then I say, then we formally go into some sort of like a contract in the therapy space, but we'll have a pre-therapy talk. So I can say, if there's any questions you want to talk about, anything you want to talk about in regards to what you think it looks like and what it doesn't look like. And that's how, excuse me, that's how I have worked in before. I think it was Scott or somebody else, or I think it was Essay, and he was talking about what does therapy look like? The question was, do they even know what therapy is before we even get to what therapy looks like? Because yes, we've got generations or people or families kind of re-traumatizing their projection, their stuff, because maybe what they didn't know is what they didn't know. So it's almost like, okay, you almost have to stop somewhere. But it's about the education of the community. It takes a village to raise a child. So it almost takes a community to heal itself.
I have a couple of questions, and I'll come back to them. First, Jide.
Quickly mentioned that this term sort of well-being conversations has started to come through. Maybe that's just an organizational thing, but it's like they've offered people sort of training and coaching to have well-being conversations. And I'm just wondering, how would that sound to a young person? How would that be received by a young person if you were just saying, look, we're just having a well-being conversation, or just centering it around a conversation?
But you have to have a relationship with that young person to begin to talk about them talking about their well-being. Can't just rock up and say, hey, how's your well-being? Sorry, Shenna?
Yeah, no, actually, like I've been given a lot of food for thought by what's been said today. And I think it's a little bit like sometimes the people that need help the most are like the hardest to reach. And I feel like one of the things, well, there's a few things within the Black community specifically, is like what was mentioned is that culturally, it's always, you know, what happens in this house stays in this house. So first of all, we already have that against us, that we've got this, you know, we're in the frame of mind that we're not really allowed to talk about things that may have traumatized or upset us. And I think even for me specifically in my case, I had counselling, but it wasn't that I didn't believe in it. I just didn't think I needed it. I was like, I'm fine. Like, I'm strong. These things happen to people like me all the time. I'll deal with it. So I feel like that was something that's a barrier to overcome. I feel like I love this idea of like, in order to reach these hard to reach people, like say, for example, young boys that might be experiencing PTSD and stuff like that because of friends that they've, you know, may have seen killed or gone to prison. I don't think, number one, they really understand what they're going through. I think it becomes very normal to them. So they just accept the way that they feel, the anger that they have, they just carry it with them all the time. So I like the idea of, you know, therapy being sort of like repackaged for them, because it, you know, it is that sort of thing. You're just having a general conversation, and like you said, that was actually therapy, because I think even the word therapy, people don't really understand it. Even we had one of these events this morning, and someone was saying, you know, I thought therapy was, you know, cucumbers on your eyes and face mask, and it's really relaxing. And then when I actually went through it, it was like traumatizing because it's not what you're expecting. So I definitely love those ideas of repackaging it and just trying to get people to be more open to it by like slowly like reeling them in. I think that those are really good ideas. So I just wanted to
Thank you for that. SA, can I put you on the spot? What are your feelings? What are your thoughts in this? And making therapy palatable.
No, I think it's completely right, because at the moment I'm with an organization that is doing a Black women's therapeutic group and also doing a Black women's psychoeducation group, and I'm sort of trying to develop a program that feels, as you said, Shenna, sorry if I mispronounce your name, that is repackaged, that feels like us, you know, that isn't coming from a Western perspective. Yeah, we can, because I think in terms of psychoeducation and pre-therapy, I think has been named a few times. This is what I was thinking about, understanding how trauma impacts us. Because I think a lot of the times, I think as Shanna, you was just saying just now about, okay, it happened, yeah. Like I feel like we become desensitized to actually, but giving language and giving a name, and I think, who was it? Scotty was talking about you know, polyvagal theory. There's theory about how trauma impacts the nervous system and what that looks like on an individual. So in terms of hypervigilance, that's it, Scotty, that you named. In terms of anxiety, in terms of, you know, how you're feeling within yourself, how you feel within your body. Because as we know, there's certain conditions as a Black community that are prevalent, and we wonder why. Okay, so what experiences have led to this psychosomatic symptoms of how, you know, trauma has manifested physically,
generationally?
Thank you. So yeah, that's my thoughts. I hope I answered your question.
I'm so excited by this conversation. Sorry, I clearly I need to get out more. But anyway, so we've talked about how do we repackage, how do we rename therapy. We've talked a bit about what do we mean by Black therapy, African-centered therapy. We talked a little bit about that. But as practitioners and potential practitioners, where do we go to get our nurturing? Where do we go to get our replenishment? Where do we go to get the work done for ourselves that helps us to center and then decenter race and racism, so that we're useful for the people we're trying to, you know, provide therapy for? How do we nurture ourselves in this? Scotty, tell me this, unless it's not something you've thought about, in which case let me shut up.
I think about this all the time, because one of my roles now is running a Voices of Colour in an organisation for BAME members of staff, predominantly Black members of staff. And when they come to me with some of the systemic things that they're facing, it does trigger me. But I have safe spaces where I can go and I can say, actually, I'm supporting this. So like reflective practice, as practitioners, as Black practitioners, we should have reflective spaces where we can actually hold some of the trauma that we're experiencing. And again, that relationship that I spoke about. So I'm just about relationships. Relationships is the key. So if we can have those kind of reflective spaces where as Black therapists, we can do this type of stuff. where we can talk about, actually, this is how this work impacts me. And once it's in your awareness, it's not unconscious no more, you're aware. Am I going to be transferring this onto my young people, onto the parents that I work with, on the families that I work with? You bring it into your own awareness that there's still things around systemic and institutionalized racism that triggers you, but it's being aware of it and understanding it and processing it. And I think when we started the conversation, we started to think about the benefits of clients seeing therapists that look like them. Well, I think there's a benefit in therapists sitting with other therapists that looks like them and talking about this stuff.
Yeah, and being able to connect on that level is fundamental, for me anyway, in my various other lives, fundamentally important. Beverly, what do you feel, apart from put on the spot?
Sorry, I feel a bit distracted because I was writing something in the chat, but I think it is definitely important that we have those spaces where we can speak about our experience of working in very traumatic situations. Currently, I mean, I work in private practice, so I don't necessarily have a group, but through the African-centered course, there's supervision that we have, so we can talk about that. We have a WhatsApp group, so we talk about that. And I think it's been really beneficial for me to be able to talk in an African-centered way, to talk to people who get it. I don't have to explain to them, we can get it. And that makes a difference. I have had spaces where I've been able to talk about things and people haven't understood. And that's left me feeling really empty. So I think it's so key. And I think if nothing else, that's probably the first thing we should do, is find the spaces that we can talk, and then we can do the work. I think it's very difficult to do the work and then trying to find those spaces afterwards.
Absolutely.
If I can just add just quickly on what you said there, Beverly, people don't understand or just met with silence, complete and utter silence. And it's like, wow, okay.
Even as professional therapists, you're still regarded as A, other, and B, lesser in settings that don't belong to us. You know, that's Jide?
Yeah, I was just going to say that there are organisations that are available. So you've got UK ABSI. So there's the Association of Black Psychologists, which started in the United States.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, now you've got the UK chapter. And you don't necessarily have to be a psychologist in order to join that organisation, because then it's where you have access to training, where you have access to other people, where you have access to support. And it's through that they're organising the SAKU, which is to be able to come together in spirit and to share your experience, your journey, your awakening, because it is that. And we also need to keep that in mind. And it's a sense of there's a reawakening of that, because when you're connecting to the traditions that suddenly had been taken as being developed by the other, and you realize where this wisdom and knowledge originates from.
Yeah.
So suddenly we're not just placed in a time and space and we've had to just absorb what everyone else has been doing. We realize where this has actually come from. And then so we can connect to the source of what that wisdom and what that knowledge is, and that sense of spirit that comes with that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. This is, I think, a really, so we've talked about what does Black therapy mean? How do we repackage therapy so that, you know, young people might be able to be more receptive? How do we nurture ourselves as therapists and practitioners? I want us now to look squarely, please, at Stop Search. And if we can just first talk about what our experience, our understanding of Stop Search is. I'm presupposing that we all understand the levels of disproportionality. Okay, so can we first talk a bit about what we understand about Stop Search and kind of how that impacts the young people and older people who we have or might come into contact with?
I'll go again.
Lovely, thank you,
so
Jamie.
I had a session actually this morning with someone who, it was on the telephone, and I kind of knew I was coming here, and we was having a chat, and she was like looking out the window and she was like, oh, they're stopping and searching someone outside. And I thought, okay. And I kind of went into it with her a little bit. She was basically saying how, they always come to this estate and they're always bothering us. And I was saying, how does that make you feel? And then she was like, like almost like we're in a prison and like they're the prison guards in the estate. And I thought that was like interesting, do you know what I mean? And for me, this is why when something does happen in certain communities, people are, especially young people who may witness something, they're not going to speak up. Because if I'm looking at you as the enemy, why am I going to help the enemy?
Absolutely.
Even though that thing may have happened to my friend, you're still my enemy. And I'll be honest with you, I've got numerous young clients. It's a big thing with a lot of my clients is stop and search and how they're treated and how they feel about police and how they're spoken to and how it makes you feel. And yeah, so it is a real thing.
It's a big thing. Mike Shiner, you were going to say something and I cut you off.
So I think there's from the stuff that I've heard of talking to especially young people about this over several years, there's obviously the immediate kind of fear and trauma that's triggered by it. But one of the things which has really come through to me and how I think about it is I'm a big fan of attachment theory, and I've come to think of the state. Imagine the state as a parent, and imagine what your relationship would be like with your parent if your parent stop and search you every time you went out to school. That your attachment style would be deeply damaged and insecure, and that's what I think stop and search is doing to people. I think it's not only in the moment creating a sense of fear and trauma as we understand it on that immediate and individual level, but it goes much deeper than that. It's creating a profoundly disrupted attachment with the state and the country that you're part of.
Scotty, take yourself off mute. You're on mute. Thank you.
Can I say something? I think just to add on to that as well is when we talk about trauma and being re-traumatized, you see police, if you've been traumatized by a stop and search and how they treated you, you see police every day. So if you're a young person who has been treated a certain way by a police officer or police, I'm going to see them again the next day. So I'm being re-traumatized almost every day when I see them.
Mm-hmm.
Scotty?
Yeah, I think this conversation today, I've taken away a lot more than I thought thinking. This made me think about personal experiences in terms of my own upbringing. So, grew up on an estate in northwest London, Stonebridge. In the 80s, we had Operation Trident, and that was the beginning of the so-called war on black crime in this country. And then it's transpired now to the gangs unit, which we already know is like a secret attack on the black community.
Not so secret.
It's not so secret now. Sadiq has kind of blown it up. But it made me think about a particular experience when I had my son in my car. And I think my son was about 4 or 5 years old. And because of my traumatic experiences with the police, when they've pulled me over, my whole frequency changed. So unconsciously, my son at 4 or 5 was already starting to pick up a mistrust of the police. And then as he's got older, that mistrust has become reinforced by his own experiences. And as a group of young people, I think it was the youth, I can't remember his name, is in Croydon, Jade, he was saying doing the outreach. In terms of stop and search, it's so traumatic for our young people that when they see police, and now they associate social workers with police, the school with police, all of these systems are part of what you said, society, the mistrust, that's when it comes in. So stop and search, I think it puts you in such a hyper-vigilant, mistrustful state that you begin to distrust all the other systems in the state because they're all part of that systemic way of working. So I think it's around acknowledging the harm that stop and search done. And when you're in that constant, if you're in an area with a high crime rate, social economic deprivation, the presence of the police is going to be more. And then, you know, I've done some training with police around unconscious bias. We have to understand where they are. So normally when it's the police that's coming to these areas, it's the special patrol groups or the TSG, the thick and stupid group. That's what they call them in the police service. Because most of those police officers, they're quite thick. And they just run out of the van and they just, there's no thought process in how does this actually impact the patient, the client, the young person.
They don't care. So you say they don't think. I'm suggesting they don't care. Okay.
Generalization, and I can't agree with you on that, Deborah. You can't say they don't care, but there's been a reinforcement of systemic behavior by a group, but I can't say they don't, because I sat down with some policemen and worked with them in regarding what to do. Vast majority, yes, and they're thinking, yes, but to generalize they all don't care, no. I can't simply blanket wash like that.
I could never say they all don't care because I don't know all of them, but I know that systemic racism means that they're not making the required efforts to change. So on an individual basis, you might be good to your children and animals, but that's not impacting well for, you know, my relatives. Jide, sorry, and then Nina.
Yeah, and you know, because it's, for me, it's a tool of oppression and control.
Yes.
And I mean, and it is state driven, it's politically driven, it's policy driven, you know, in terms of, you know, targets and easy targets. Because, you know, like I was on the way back to school, in school uniform, carrying a school bag, but yet I look like a grown adult that had just burgled somebody's house. How is that possible? You know, they came looking for my younger brother, and before we had a chance to open the door, they had kicked in the door and jammed it so it couldn't even be opened. And so when you think about their approach and the mentality, it's like they've adopted an idea already as to how they're going to approach you and why they're going to approach you in that way. And so, and we now see it's like, you know, when they are stopping and searching and they're collecting the information and the data on young black men, you know, it's being fed into the system. So they're already sort of, you know what I mean, being earmarked as being criminals. But if you go outside any club that's predominantly where white people go, you could improve your policing statistics, because
Absolutely.
the amount of drug possession that you could get from there. So, you know, in this targeted policing is bullshit. Excuse my language, but you know what I mean? It is, and we know what underlies it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Nina?
Yeah, thanks everyone. I was just thinking as people were expressing their you know, experiences in therapy, I was it's obvious that, you know, so many of our young people who get stopped and searched, you know, the amount of stress that it is creating, you know, it kind of changes their physiology as well, but also a sense of self and how that is being destroyed through this. And recognizing that, and to what extent, you know, with our collective knowledge, what we could do to, we all have very good individual experiences of, well, I would also, Neil, call it well-being, you know, in terms of where do we turn this direction, and kind of recognizing that, you know, stress comes from many, many different things, the daily experiences of racism, looking at a police officer and kind of just, you know, jumping out of your skin or whatever. But actually, where do we kind of collectively, how can we also change that into a form of, you know, a kind of good practice, or collectively that also equally, because in supporting the community, we are supporting the individual self and looking at it from that perspective, because, you know, I don't have the words to kind of suggest what that might look like. I think the therapists in the room have better ideas about it, but, you know, instead of, because in this culture and society, maybe it's just seen as an individual thing. But back home, for example, in my country, in India, I mean, in Hindi, there wouldn't be a equivalent kind of word for therapy. In fact, that is linked more to kind of, medicine and being sick, you know. And that's why even I just don't link into this word, because it doesn't talk to me. You know, and we all find our ways of kind of linking into this thing. But I was just thinking about how collectively we can use this this information and kind of vast experience and knowledge in this room. I just think it's fantastic, Deborah, for us to kind of
trying to capture this to make something more sustainable from
because
that. Sorry,
this,
you can see where my head
it's not even recognized that, you know, stress is not recognized in terms of assessments that maybe youth justice practitioners may be doing with young Black people in the rooms. So I'm concerned about all of that. And Issa was saying something similar earlier, that, you know, she's surprised. I was surprised many years ago when I was looking at restorative justice practices, and I was thinking, gosh, there's not an iota of anything to do or recognizing cultural competence or different people's cultures, ways of understanding restorative practices. And I'm talking about 20 years ago now. And I don't think that culture has changed very much either.
Okay.
So
we need to kind of make a plan for how to capture this and where we're taking it. But before we even start with that, Mike, I think you was next. You had your hand up. You said you wanted to say something. Okay. And then Shanna, and then Eshe, I'm coming to you. So get ready for your word or two, yeah? Where's Mike now?
I'm here, I'm fine, Deborah, just for sure.
Okay, Shanna, sorry, Mike's said no, go.
Okay. I just wanted to say, just in relating sort of like the traumas of stop and search and using therapy as a tool for that, because I feel like it's the understanding of what, for example, so I worked for the youth offending team for a long time, and a lot of the young boys that I worked with, like some of them were getting stopped up to like 5 times a day, like regularly within a week. And I think to understand what that does to the psyche, like the purpose of being stopped and searched is because you're under suspicion. So imagine you're just going and living your daily life and you're constantly under suspicion. Like, how does that make you feel about being a young Black man? How does that make you feel about the police who are meant to protect you? You could be genuinely not doing anything, and even if you have made a mistake and you're known to the police, that doesn't give them the right to continually still keep on using stop and search as a means to oppress you. And it's saddened because I don't know, is it done on purpose? Like, is there a reason why they do that, to break down that mentality? And I feel like if we're going to talk, like we spoke about representation as a therapist, how do you even begin to unpack that with somebody if you can't even understand that? Because there's things that will go around. For example, say you have a white male therapist and he's never been stopped and searched in his life, and then this young Black boy comes in and he's like, I don't know, 17 and has been stopped like 80 times. Where's the connection there? How do you begin to understand what that feels like?
And how does that young man take charge to say, I cannot deal with this therapist because he doesn't understand my experience, when the relationship between therapist and therapy is imbalanced in terms of power? How do we advocate for them?
And I just wanted to quickly say, just really quickly as well, in terms of representation, I don't think that sometimes, I mean, I know it's a big deal, but sometimes I don't think it's always about colour. So for example, I had counselling and it was with a Polish woman and we just clicked straight away. But I feel like the representation in that probably came from her being a woman and probably not being of like having a different heritage as well. So I feel like sometimes it can be like deeper than colour as well.
But there have to be points of contact.
Of course.
And historically those contacts are... Leon, yours?
I think just echoing some of what people are saying, but it's not only young people. I got stopped, and it's not it is a young person's thing, but I've been stopped time and time when I was younger. I used to live in the South London state, and quite well known one. So I really was armoured up as well, because I think even what Michael was saying regarding how you view the state, and I think it's been reinforced when you have social workers and other practitioners that's joining that same state. So therefore you almost see them as the enemy before they've even started. But it's in general, I think echoing what everybody else said, it's a quota thing. You look like somebody. So how do I deal with it now as an adult compared to how I dealt with it then? The worst part was that I got stopped with my daughters in the car, and they started crying and said, "Daddy, what did you do wrong?" So I'm trying to explain to them, "Baby, I didn't do a thing wrong. They stopped you. Police only stop criminals." I said, "At what?" And so therefore I'm having to kind of soothe myself, soothe my children, then trying to take them to school afterwards, and then stop myself from running a policeman over because I was that mad. Because as a child, I thought, okay, I'm angry, but I don't know how to explain my anger. And this is what happens as a child. You don't know how to articulate your feelings. So in the room, you kind of give the young people a voice and tools how to articulate themselves. You're feeling like, are you feeling like this because it's like this? Or do you feel like, yeah, okay, is it because of this? Yeah. So then you help them almost soothe themselves. It may happen again. What do you do again if it happens again? But as an adult, when you do it to me now, I have more power, whether it's physicality or in the pen. But at the time I was so mad, I thought, okay, Leon, you got a family. Leon, don't do this. Because you embarrassed me. You belittled me. And there was no need because the police were past. And, okay, they're going past. They stopped, put the blue lights on, told me to come out, and intentionally tried to belittle me. Now, do I view all police like that? No. But I do, when I do drive, I slightly armor up. Will I be stopped? When I see police, will I be stopped? And that's not everybody's capacity. And that's the young people's capacity.
And that's for us as therapists and adults to help them to express and to, discharge, release that negativeness. Sorry, can I ask Eshe? Sorry, Eshe was going to say something because you've been really active in the chat. Sorry for taking my time.
Yeah, Essay. So I was just mentioning something in the chat about well-being checks. I imagine a lot of us working in organizations where you regularly have to risk assess and, any safeguarding concerns, you have to raise it. But then I've spoken to people who there has alarm has been raised about their behavior because they're broken. And a lot of the sessions have been about validating the humiliation and the shame that you speak of, Leon, and how degrading it is for them. And so they reach this breaking point and become angry and rageful. And then the police who have caused the trauma have then, a well-being check has been issued for the police to come and say, are you okay? How is the person supposed to feel
when it's the perpetrator coming to sort out what the perpetrator?
And I just wanted to share that. Just imagine being on the receiving end, or having again a police officer invading your space, coming to your personal space, to your home, to ask you if you're okay when you certainly aren't okay. I mean, and the implications of that, if they're not able to perhaps navigate their difficult emotions or essentially able to remain calm in the situation, and may then act out. And so is that not understandable? And I feel like it's stop and search. I can go into earlier memories of witnessing my brothers, and it's something that stays with you.
Yes.
And so just imagine, these young people that are being stopped countless times in one day, much less a month or a year. What does that do?
So I was gonna say, like, just like my own personal experience of it. So I think I was 15. So I've been stopped and searched before that quite a lot. But when I was 15, I actually went to go and have trials for England. I play football, and I went up to where they trained was in Lillestrøm back in the day. So Mum dropped me off to Houston station. I went on the train anyway. On the way back, I'm suited and booted. I've got a suit on because you had to go in a suit. In Houston station, I actually got stopped. They didn't search me, but they stopped me. And it was like, what are you doing here? Bearing in mind, I'm in a suit. And it was like, I think that moment for me was the moment that really, even though I've been stopped and searched before, but that moment was the moment where it was like, do I even belong in this country? Like, I'm going to represent this country. Like, I'm actually going to represent. I'm this close to representing this country, but you're treating me like I almost don't belong in this country, kind of thing. And I remember, like, after they had stopped talking to me, my mum kind of came around the corner, and I just walked up to my mum. I didn't even say anything to her because I thought it's just not even worth it. But I think that moment for me was like the breaking point where it was like, okay, like, you look at me like I don't even really belong here, kind of thing. Even though I'm willing to go and represent this country in football, you lot are telling me I don't belong here. I don't belong in this. Do you know what I mean? I'm different from other people. So, like, yeah, that was just like my experience, kind of stop and search. That was my kind of moment where it was like, this is different how I'm getting treated there.
Okay, thank you for that.
Just quickly ask something about that, because sometimes I feel like, you know, as when you get stopped and searched, but let's just say, for example, you might be wearing something like, I don't know, like a hoodie, or, you know, one of those things that they might say you look suspicious, so you might rationalize that. Exactly. But then I guess to actually be in a suit, like, there's no way you can go with that. It's like, I literally look like I'm going to work. Why would you stop me? I just, yeah.
And that was one of the big things, was I was in a suit. I wasn't in the area. I was in Houston Station in a suit, thinking I look fly. And then, you know, for that to happen, it's like, okay, so it don't matter what I do, I'm going to get stopped and searched. It don't matter how I dress, what area I'm in, this is going to happen, kind of thing.
Yeah, I just on the the one before about the suit, I remember years ago, I saw a Met briefing back in the day when there were always the concern about yardies, and part of the briefing said it's not unusual for yardies to be really polite to police officers. So you sort of think, how do you then get out of being defined as a yardie? Because if you're rough, you're defined as a yardie. If you're polite, you're defined as a yardie. But I also wanted to say, I'm just really struck by the testimony that we've heard from the last kind of three guys, and particularly because I've never really heard it in this way before, of being fathers, of being stopped and searched as fathers. There's something really profound in that for me. There's something really powerful about how that emasculates you and takes something away from you.
Embarrassing.
And I think it's a really strong story. But what I've also been thinking for a while is, in terms of the pre-therapy stuff, for me, a lot of it is just about giving people forums in which they can get this stuff out in whatever medium it's in. And I don't think the medium matters, because for me it's all about being trauma informed. And so the idea would be is that we simply think about lots of different ways in which people can begin to recognize and process, whether that's music, art, theatre, writing, whatever it is. But I think what I'm concerned about is we don't want to unleash stuff that we don't know how to deal with. And what I'd really like is to think about how we could work with the therapists who can help us contain the rage, the anger, the upset, the hurt, the pain.
Also stopwatch.
Yeah.
Okay. You need to,
so I guess for me, I'm thinking, how can we stopwatch work with you guys, the therapists, together on this is what I'd really like to. I mean, I know we can't do it now, but just to keep that communication going, because I found this, I mean, it's been everything that I hoped it would be, and a whole lot more this session. It's been amazing. I'd just like to keep the conversation going if we can.
Well, I'd like to come back to that at the very end and just see if Lottie's back. Lottie, you got any headphones yet?
How's the sound? Is that better?
Hi.
Good. Okay. Yeah, I was saying I was just kind of a bystander before, because there's quite a lot of noise in my background. I'm quiet now because I home educate my two younger children. But I mean, I'm really on here as a parent. I think I was keen to kind of join this because my daughter attends Dunraven School, and actually we just saw an incident that happened that actually went into brutality. You know, of a 13-year-old boy on Streatham High Road in London. Now, what's happening to that school community now? You know, he's in his school uniform, and then listening to a personal account here speaking about, you know, I'm dressed up in a suit. you know, 15 years old, and all the time this adultification is happening of these children all the time, and it's happening to girls, and you know, more and more they're arresting them, and they're in their school uniform. You see children being released in their school uniform, being held for hours and hours. So it kind of goes even beyond stop and search till it gets to, you know, it's as though, okay, now we're not stopping and searching. So I guess I'm interested. Now we're not just stopping and searching. We're actually, without proper reasonable cause, whatever that kind of means, we're actually taking you to the station as well.
Yeah.
Just hold you there for a few hours so we can collect some data.
So
the
they
next
can
time,
rough you up more.
Rough you up more, but you're collecting your data as well. So they're putting you into a system because you might not be in any of them other systems. It's very interesting. And I wonder if, you know, if young people, and I guess maybe they do, and I never thought of it in that way, just thinking of the system that they're in, and also that kind of maybe not collusion, but another part of the system, having the social workers, having the teachers, and how all of those systems actually, are any of them there? Do any of them care about me? Can any of them help me feel safe? So all these systems, stop and search plus, okay, I've got all of these other people around me, but I'm still not even safe when they're there too.
I'd like to tell everybody thank you, because we're just about over time. But if you can leave your contact details in the chat, and I know that we're going to be revisiting this conversation with a view to developing something through Stopwatch that kind of addresses the challenges that we've identified today. So in addition to thanking you and everybody, you've been really fantastic, and your sharing has humbled me. Well, you know, what's my humility to anybody? Your sharing has really humbled me. And if you could leave your contact details in the chat, we'll get back to you and see where we take this and how we want to make this something. Thank you all very much.
Could I just make a point?
Hello, Rose. Hi.
Hi, it's just to say I've not been able to connect to the meeting as I would have wanted to.
Rose.
And it may change again with the noise background also.
Yeah.
But I'd just like to say that we really do need some sort of support system, whether it is through therapy or any other form of support for our young people. Because one of the things we cannot overlook is the fact that our young people are traumatised. The trauma goes quite deep. We have to remember that sometimes there have been parents that have not come out of prison cells. There's been brothers, uncles, you know, there's been relatives that have not been able to come out of a prison cell. You know, deaths have occurred, and that is trauma in itself. For when someone has been stopped, so much can be associated with that event. And we cannot overlook that.
Go on, Rosalie.
So just to point that bit out, really. And again, just to say, I'm so sorry, I was not able to join the meeting as I had hoped. But, you know, I'm sure it's been a good meeting, and, you know, trauma is really deep. It runs deep, and it cannot be overlooked. The impact and the consequences are quite severe, and we do really need to address these in the best way that we possibly can as a community, collectively.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Rose. Thank you. Jide, and that's the end.
Yeah, I was just going to briefly say about, you know, how sort of, you know, people are targeted, and, you know, children are targeted. And it's not just the police, because I was on a bus and I had to speak out because there was these two bus inspectors that had stopped two girls who were dressed in their school uniform and asking them about sort of, you know, their tickets and what have you. And I said, it's clear that the children, they're in school uniform. There shouldn't be any need for this. I don't know why you're sort of wanting to take their details when they're underage, and also the fact that you're delaying everyone else. And so we got into it about that, because I think there's a need for us to challenge, because, you know, we know that it's going on, and we need to be able to step up and support one another in those situations.
All right, on that almost positive but really real note, I'd like to thank everybody who's participated. A big thank you, hello Roz, to everybody who's participated. And if you could please leave your contact details in the chat before you leave, if you want to take this further, if you want to be involved in more of this work and working out what we need to do, that would be really helpful. But thank you, everybody. Thank you all so much. All right. Bye now.